Okay, so in the previous two videos, we introduced the idea of supply, supply curve, supply schedule, and law of supply. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at, in a second, but we're going to look at goods that break the law of supply. So what we should do is look at the supply curves for goods that obey the law of supply. So what is the law of supply? We're going to come to it in a second, but basically what it's saying is that as the price increases, the quantity supplied increases, and as the price falls, the quantity supplied falls. Now, a curve that is upward sloping from left to right shows that the good in question, this is the supply curve of a single firm supplying a particular good, a one good, right? Not a number of goods. So as the price increases, we should see an increase in the quantity supplied. So therefore, what we're saying is an upward sloping supply curve from left to right shows that the good obeys the law of supply. Now, the reason that we gave for that was because if we start here and we move up the supply curve, following a change, an increase in price, we are saying currently, and don't forget not to write this down per se, we're going to go into a much more detailed answer in later videos, why the supply curve slopes upwards, why the supply curve is upward sloping from left to right, why there is a law of supply. But what we're saying now is as the price rises, ceteris paribus, the profit margin per good sold increases. All right. Now we're going to give a much better definition later on, kind of like the demand curve when we went into deep analysis of what that meant. We're going to do the same with the supply curve. So this is to show that a supply curve that is upward sloping from left to right, as price increases, quantity supplied will also increase. And with the same shape supply curve, upward sloping from left to right, as the price falls, the quantity supplied also falls, because ceteris paribus, following a reduction in the price, the profit margin per good sold decreases. So therefore, the incentives that firms face to continue to produce this particular good following a price fall decreases. So there's a movement along the existing supply curve from there to there, following a reduction in price from P1 to P2, showing that this good obeys the law of supply because the quantity supplied has reduced from Q1 to Q2. This is less. Q2 is less than Q1, and again that's following a price fall. So it's from the slope of the above supply curves that we get the law of supply. And supply curves that slope upwards from left to right obey the law of supply. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at two separate supply curves that break the law of supply. But before we do that, let's remind ourselves of a few definitions. Firstly, supply. This is the willingness and ability. That ability is going to become very important at the end of this video, of producers to produce a quantity of a good or service. Okay, ceteris paribus, a Latin expression meaning other things being equal. Okay, nothing else has changed but one variable, because we're trying to assess the effect of a change in one variable on another. How much a change in one variable causes another variable to change. So the law of supply, which we've just looked at, two separate situations of goods that obey the law of supply. As the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied will normally rise. When the price of a good or service rises, the quantity supplied of that good or service rises, and when the price of a good or service falls, the quantity supplied of that good or service falls. Now, this is what I want you to think about. Okay, so I'd like you to think, what would this supply curve look like? And here's a clue, it's going to break the law of supply. Draw the supply curve for seats at a stadium on match day. Okay, and all I'll say is, remember that there are only a certain number of seats in the stadium and they cannot be increased or reduced on the day of the game. So think of a big, 70,000, 80,000 seater stadium. In Ireland, the biggest one is Croke Park. Okay, it's about 80,000 seats. Think about that. On the day of the game, it could be, the World Cup final in soccer, or the All-Ireland final in Gaelic football, or what have you. And on the day in Croke Park, there's only 80,000 seats. Can't be reduced or increased. What does that look like? If you want to pause the video now, think about it, and then when you have an answer, just press play. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to think about that. So basically what this is called, and please don't concern yourself with its name yet, but it's a perfectly inelastic supply curve. Don't we sound so intelligent when we say things like that? And this is what it looks like. Now, usually students will kind of guess. They'll either say it's straight across or up straight like that, okay? You are right to realize that there is no effect of a change in price on the quantity supplied. Okay, now what we are saying here is this: what is the relationship between price and quantity supplied? All I need you to say is, as price changes, quantity supplied does not change. Okay, this is in what's called the short run. All right. Now, the above supply curve is known as a perfectly inelastic supply curve. It just goes straight up like that. And usually, as you can see, land is given as something like that. And we can come to that later on. Okay, the supply curve represents a good, the supply of which does not change, or if you want, the quantity supplied of which does not change as the price changes, and at least in the short run. So what we've got now is when price changes, the quantity supplied doesn't change. Now, there are two examples. One of them is seats in a stadium, which I've already said. And another one now, and this is a little bit more, I don't want to say technical, but you have to be rather more specific. The amount of fish at a fish market or something like that. Now, what I mean by something like that is a good that is perishable. Okay, a good that cannot be held over for future use. All right, so fish could last for a day or two, I grant you, okay, or a few days, but it can't be held over till next year. Whereas something like tinned tuna, so I mean fresh fish is what I mean. So tinned tuna can be held over for years and years, but fresh fish at a fish market cannot. And also there's a fixed amount because there's only so much the fishermen caught that day. So if they caught a lot, the supply curve will shift out. But, I mean, if they increase the amount they catch, is really what I should say, then the supply curve will shift out, but it'll still be fixed based on the amount that they caught that day. So what we're saying here is that, look, there's been no law of supply broken or changed here in any way, or obeyed in any way, shape or form, because there's been no change in price. Now, this is the thing, when the price increases, what quantity are we at? And we are still at Q1. Okay, so even after an increase in price, we're still at the exact same quantity. Now, this breaks the law of supply because the law of supply states that as price rises, quantity supplied also increases. But I hope you can understand with seats at a stadium on match day or the amount of fresh fish caught at a fish market, then an increase in price won't suddenly send the fishermen out because it takes days to catch stuff. All right, so they won't run out quickly and say, I'll be back in an hour. It doesn't work like that. All right, so there's a fixed amount, and it doesn't matter what the price changes. And I will, of course, knowing me at this stage, hopefully that I'll repeat myself, but it won't change. The quantity supplied won't change as price changes. So in the above example, we see that even though the price has risen, quantity supplied stay the same. In other words, quantity supplied is fixed irrespective of price. Now, I do want you to say that because the law of supply states that it's talking about price changes, like the law of demand, but now we're talking about supply. So price changes change the quantity supplied. There was a price change in the above example, price increase, and the quantity supplied remained the same. Okay, I've said all that. Okay, so examples, tickets in a stadium to see a match. The quantity supplied is fixed as there are only so many seats in the stadium, and it doesn't matter how high price rises, the supply cannot increase. Now, if I'm going to go one way in example, I'm sure you're not going to be surprised that I'm going to try and do the other. What happens if price falls? So the law of supply states that as price falls, quantity supplied decreases. Well, does that happen on this graph? Obviously not. The quantity supplied stays the same. So if we are thinking about the poor unfortunate fishmongers at the fish market, if the price is just really, really low, there's very few people, the demand is low for whatever reason, they're still going to have to try and get rid of that fish because it will not hold over for too much longer. So it all has to be sold that day. So they are kind of really suffering if the price falls low. Okay. Now, if tickets at a match are not selling, the owners of the grounds will lower the price in order to try and fill it. Okay, but it's not as if they're going to say we're going to hold the seats for this match until another day. They can't do that. The match is on that one time. Okay, so if the stadium still is not full on the day of the match, the owners of the stadium might drop the price of admission far below the original asking price. This is because it costs them nothing extra to let somebody in, and any money that they can get for the ticket is better than no money at all. The marginal cost, which we'll come to later on, of course, like most things that I talk about, is practically zero. Now, the second type of supply curve that breaks the law of supply, essentially, and I'm not going to talk too much about the short run yet, we're going to deal with that in later videos in this playlist, but basically applies to every single firm in the short run at some quantity. So draw the supply curve for a firm that is currently producing 50 units a week. Why not? They are willing to sell more as price rises. Now, however, even if price continues to rise over and over again, the maximum amount they can supply is 100 units a week. Whatever the flip we're talking about, it's completely irrelevant now. I think I used the example of footballs. It's completely irrelevant now. We're just saying there is a physical limit at the moment to the amount that they can produce, and I will talk about why later in this video. But pause the video now, see if you can answer that question, and don't worry if you get it wrong. And then once you've got an answer, a graph, press play, and we'll have a go. Okay, well look, I hope you had an opportunity to do that, so now I'm going to go. So don't forget, look, we've got our, what do we have here in these diagrams? We've got our title, we've got our price with our currency, we've got our origin, we've got quantity with units per time period. Now obviously we can't have the D1, the P1, the Q1, all that kind of stuff, but still we can have an S1. So what I want to do is, I'm just going to stop there, right? That is a perfectly, absolutely normal supply curve that obeys the law of supply. But there is a capacity constraint. You must be willing and able, not just willing, to supply a good at different prices over a particular period of time. And then what happens is, because they have a maximum capacity constraint, they cannot produce any more than 100 units a week. Right, now you could say, oh, I'll work longer. Okay, but then the capacity constraint, at least with the current level of factors of production at the moment, is 200 per week. But there is going to be a constraint, and I think you will agree that that applies to every single firm. Okay, because in the short run, which I'll talk about later, when we keep at least one factor of production is held constant, right? So let's say the machines, all right, there's going to be a limit to the amount that they can produce in a certain period of time. Yes, they can expand, but now we're getting out of the first short run. Okay, now again, I don't want to go too deep into it now, because I'm going to deal with it in great minutiae in future videos in this playlist. Okay, so what is the relationship between price and quantity supplied? I want you to see something, right? So let's have a look. Let's talk about it and then have a look at the diagram in a second. Right, so that diagram, represents a firm with a capacity constraint. There is a certain limit, at least in the short run, currently with the given level of factors of production, that we cannot produce beyond. This means that after a certain point, the firm is unable to increase quantity supplied, even though price may continue to rise and rise and rise and rise. They may get very frustrated, they may try crazy things to increase the amount they produce and hence sell, but currently, as it stands, they can't do anything else. Can't produce any more. This is because it is using all of its machines and all of its workers. Let's not be silly now. It's using all of its factors of production to their fullest extent and physically just can't produce anymore. Now, what we're going to do, we're almost done with this video, guys, so just stay with me, okay? What we're going to do is, again, is there any law of demand here? No, because this is P1. Price has to change, okay, for the law. Sorry, I said law of demand, law of supply, excuse me. Okay, so if price increases, then the quantity supplied is increased from P1 to P2. Quantity supplied is increased from Q1 to Q2. As such, it's obeying the law of supply. Price continues to increase up to P3 and quantity supplied continues to increase up to Q3, still obeying the law of supply. When we get to P4, what we notice is that we are stuck on P3. Now, I know you may think that the firm can decide, or at least a competitive firm can decide the price that it charges. The idea is, yes, it does set its own price, but it has to take kind of other things into account. In that, if they charge above the market price, nobody's going to buy off them because they can get it cheaper elsewhere. So something else is causing the price to rise, and these guys in this firm, because they have their factors of production at the quantity Q3, are producing the maximum amount of quantity supplied, and as such cannot produce any more. So therefore it is breaking the law of supply because their factors of production are maxed out. The only way for them to increase their production, increase their quantity supplied, to try to benefit from higher profit margins at higher prices, would be to expand the firm, to invest in new and more factors of production. Okay, particularly most likely capital. All right, now, so what are we saying here? Well, we're saying basically there is a physical limit beyond which the firm currently cannot produce. All right, maybe if you give them a week and they get more capital and more machines, or they move to a bigger factory with more machines, then they can. That's fine. But we're saying right now, given their current level of factors of production, there is a limit beyond which they cannot produce. And even if the price goes up to P5, it does not matter. Now, the reason that this curve breaks the law of supply is because at some stage in the short run, given the current factors of production, when we're not allowing them all to change, all right, there is a limit on their production. Now, let's go just, I would say this is any firm in the short run, there is going to be a limit. But let's just talk about trying to show the relationship between price and quantity supplied. Okay, so what you could do is you could draw this diagram and say below P3, as price increases, quantity supplied increases. Above P3, as price increases, quantity supplied does not change. And there you go. Okay guys, look, thank you so much for watching. I really hope this helps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.